Hi everyone, welcome to another table talk. So as the title of the video says, in this video, which might be a little bit long, but anyway, we'll muscle through it. I'm going to go over, I get asked quite often through my YouTube channel and other forums about KF or Klein-Fogelman airfoils for park jets and how I make them, what I make them out of, all that sort of stuff. So essentially that's what I'm going to do in this video. So if you're unfamiliar with what Klein-Fogelman or KF airfoils, I'll refer to them as KF for the remainder of the video just for brevity. Essentially, it's this is obviously a park jet, foam park jet, prop and slot. Motor is here. You know, quite a simple but inexpensive but a lot of fun. So essentially, the Klein-Fogelman airfoil, here I have a KF4, which has an airfoil top of the wing and bottom of the wing. And essentially it's, you know, foam sandwiching the wing, and hopefully you can see here at the trailing edge here, it's created a bit of a step. And the theory is that as the airplane is moving forward through the air, the airflow goes over this airfoil, and this little step causes a little vortex in behind it, and it helps to keep the air laminated on the wing for longer. What I can tell you is, you know, I don't have a wind tunnel to prove all of this sort of stuff, but what I can tell you is, for me, compared to flying an park jet with no airfoils and then flying it with KF4, which are my preferred setup, I do notice a big difference in stability, wind penetration, speed, and just really locked in precise feeling. So essentially that's what it is in a nutshell. If you want more information, I would actually at this point encourage you to just pause the video, go down into the video description. I will have right at the very top a link to a blog post that I wrote a while ago, part of a series of blogs I wrote called "Which Park Jet for Me?" And it explains in a lot more detail, a lot more links, information by people a lot smarter than me on KF airfoils. Some of it, again, will be my opinion. I'm not going to get into a rant here on this video because sometimes when you get into discussions about these things, there's very strong feelings for and against for different setups and that sort of stuff. So I'm not going to do that in this video. So I would encourage you to go read that blog post. It also has, like, as I said, it has some really good videos that will help you visualize, that I found on YouTube, that will help you visualize how the whole thing works. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to start off, I like my KF airfoils to start off around 40% of the total wing area. And if you've hopefully already read that blog post, you'll understand why. I've experimented with them a bit smaller. For me, they don't provide sort of the stability that I'm looking for. Again, it's just foam. You can go and experiment with it whatever you want. What I have noted is once the KF's got up to 45% or higher. Now, let me actually backpedal a little bit. Normally on a wing that's straight, you know, that would come out here, the KF would be about 50% of wing chord, but normally once you start to sweep the wing back, the leading edge of the wing back, that area, if you have 50% of the wing plate, in my experience, or the wing area, is that you start introducing some negative behaviors. A couple that I've noticed in testing when I was part of NAMC, we did a lot of testing on KF sizes for our planes, and when you're up around 45% or higher, what we found was happening was often as the plane was in turns, if it got a little bit slow, it would start to almost fight itself. You know, it just would almost be like a toddler throwing a bit of a temper tantrum. It just wasn't happy. It wouldn't maintain smooth turns. The other thing which could be really crucial is we found that if the KF got too far back, it seemed to interfere with the harmony between the center of gravity, the rotation point, and you know, sort of the center of lift, center of pressure, as what would happen is as it was accelerating coming down, quite often it was much harder to get it to rotate, pull out of that dive and rotate than if we had a 40% KF. So anyway, there's some quick and dirty explanation. So what I'm going to do, pardon me, in this video is I've cut out, this is half a wing plate of an RC Powers F18 version 5. I've scaled it right down to, I guess, about 50% maybe. I've already drawn out the diagram showing you what I'm going to use as the wing area for my calculations. I will have a blog post supporting this video, and I'll have still photographs in that blog post, which again you'll find down below, so you can see this a little bit easier. Now most, as you may have seen on this plane, most airplanes that I've built, and I think most designers are all doing this now, is the top KF is extended forward along the lurks, intakes, anything like that, depending on what style of aircraft it is. That really helps to, in my experience, smooth, make the nose more stable, and it just feels smoother. But we're not going to use that as part of the calculation. So what I've done here already is I've taken the top KF is going to come in against the fuselage, as you can see here on this plane. So the KF, the inner part of the KF is along the fuselage, and then the inner part of the bottom KF, initially we're going to measure it going right up to the nacelles. I'll talk a little bit more about where I've trimmed it here to allow my servo. So there's a couple of things we want to mark on the plans, and I like to do all of this. You know, if this is a situation, let's say you're building a plane that doesn't have KFs, or maybe it doesn't have a bottom KF, or maybe they look too big, too small, or maybe you just want to experiment. So anyway, so what I do is I draw a line, find what's called the fuselage notch here. I've put, hopefully, for top fuselage KF, mark the fuselage notch, which is right here. So that's the notch where the fuselage is going to go. So I draw a line sort of straight up and down along the length there, right to the back here, and then I draw a line following the trailing edge of the wing that goes all the way into that, or leading edge of the wing that goes all the way into the fuselage, and of course now I've got this trailing edge marked here as well. So I'm using the F18 here because it's a little bit more, you know, not a lot of extra angles. I'm going to show you in this part briefly as well how I handle some other wing shapes. And then what I do, I actually like to use, I find metric, just measuring in centimeters or millimeters, works a lot easier. So what I'll do then is that I measure, you know, where the leading edge of the wing intersects the line that goes along the side of the fuselage. I'll measure that, take 40% of that, or multiply it by 0.4, make a mark there. And then out here on the wingtip, I do the same, measure that, take multiply that by 0.4 or 40%, make a mark there, and you can see this line here in orange. This is where, well, actually including the leading edge root extension, which I'll demonstrate. This is essentially the size of my KF on the top. Now for the one on the bottom, unfortunately, because I put the red marker on some tape here where I taped the plans together, it's kind of smudged. But what I've done here is, because the bottom KF is going to go right up to the nacelle or engine notch, depending on what it's called on the plans, I've made a red line there. So that's just for reference, because there's a couple of different ways we can do this. Because in the next part of the video, I'm actually going to cut this out of foam, and you can either use the wing template to trace out your KFs, or if you're careful, when you peel the plans off of your foam, then you can actually reuse the plans to cut out your KFs. I like to do all this drawing and all this math on the plans before I put them on the foam. That way, you know, if I'm pressing down with a pencil or a pen, I'm not marking up the foam. Also, if you know, I have a senior moment, or my dollar store calculator lets me down in my calculations, then I'm not trying to do a bunch of erasing. So that's essentially how I measure it. 40% of this area here. All right, so let's look at a different wing shape. This is the SU-27 version 5 by RC Powers. Very, very similar, although it's the trailing edge is more angled in. But again, we're doing the same thing. I didn't mark this up quite as much, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So I made the line along where the fuselage notch would be. I followed the leading edge of the wing in like that, followed the trailing edge all the way in like that. So then again, I would measure this inner line, take 40% of that, outer line, take 40% of that, and then essentially my, draw the line and mark my KF there. Now, what I've learned with sort of F-22 T-50 style planes that have, a very unique wing where it comes down and then the leading edge actually sweeps back instead of going straight or angling forward like it does on like a MiG or a Sukhoi, is what I do is I go down, again along the fuselage notch here, but what I do for the trailing edge is I come down here, sort of, there's a piece that goes, this is F-22 version 5 plans, piece that goes down here, and then what I do is I just draw a straight line in to where the fuselage line extends back here, and then I just use this area, because if I drew all the way back here, what I found through a lot of testing and experimenting is that ends up being far too big. I end up with far too big a KF. And again, like I mentioned before, if the KF gets too big, it introduces drag. Plus, it can also introduce lots of other adverse behaviors. So that's what if you had an F-22 style plan and it didn't have KFs or whatever reason you want to experiment with them and have a particular percentage of the wing area, that's what I found has worked for me. Then it prevents it from getting way too big and causing all kinds of problems. Anyway, like I said, that's what's worked for me and through lots of experimentation. All right, so hopefully that is making sense so far. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pause, stop this portion of the video. I'm going to cut this this out of some foam, and then we'll start drawing out, talking more about materials, thicknesses of foams, all that sort of stuff, and how we go about making our custom making our KF4 airfoils for our park jet. All right, so I'll be back with you very shortly. Hi folks, back with you. So I've cut out essentially my my little wing plate here for my F-18 version 5. I'm just using some scrap Dollar Tree or Adams Ready board, Dollar Tree foam Adams Ready board. So there's a couple of different ways. If you can, probably as I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to do it is if you can very, very carefully remove at least this portion of the plans. The wing and sort of the leading edge root extension. If you can remove your plans very, very carefully without ripping them, that's probably the easiest way to do it. But there's, it's also fairly simple to do it this way as well. The other thing that I would mention as well is obviously, as you would always do, make sure that you mark your center of gravity. So I'm just going to use on these F-18 version 5 or these version 5 planes from RC Powers, I always start off with there's sort of a dark rectangle, so I'm just going to poke a pin through there, just turn it around a little bit so that I know that there's a hole there. You can see that I've cut out, well, it might be hard to see, but I've cut out, there's my engine notch, or the outer part of my nacelle on the bottom, and here's my fuselage notch here. So if you don't want to be worried about getting your plans off the foam in one piece, there's another way to do it. So we'll start doing the larger KF, top KF first. So you want to kind of hold it still so you're not drawing too many lines. I'm going to pull back here a little bit so hopefully you can see it. So I'm just going to take my pencil, and down in the notch where the fuselage would be, I'm just going to draw a line there, and then along the inside here where the fuselage would be, I'm going to draw a line as well. Okay, and then I'm going to trace. What I'm going to do is mark, take again some pins, and I'm going to just poke a pin right at the trailing edge of the KF on the inside, and then the trailing edge of the KF on the outside, so I know where I'm going to join my line for my trailing edge. So I'm going to continue to trace along the outside all the way up along, and up here on this leading edge root extension, if that ends up getting a bit too long when you're dry fitting them before you're getting ready to glue them on, you can also always trim that off. And then also what I'll do at the same time is I'll mark where my engine notch is here on the inside, or where my nacelles would be, making sure, mark on the very outer side. So now I know where that line's going to be for my top KF, because once I cut out the big KF, I can use that as a template for the smaller KF that's going to go on the bottom. Okay, so I'm just going to take this off, take the pins out. Okay, so roughly that's what we have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this line that was on the inside, just draw that like that, and then find, if I can find my two pinholes. Okay. All right, so there we go. So essentially that's roughly what your top KF is going to look like. And it looks like I didn't, for some reason, the line, yeah, there we go. The pencil stopped working. So there's my line again for the bottom KF. So that's essentially one way of doing it. So what I'm going to do right now is, I'm not going to bore you with watching me cut my KFs out, is I'm actually going to carefully pull this off, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut out my top and bottom KF, and then we'll move on to talking about how I like to install them. Okay, so I'll be back with you shortly. All right, folks, back with you again. So I wanted to just point this out as I cut. I've now reused my plans to cut out my top KF. So I just kind of quickly dry fit it. Looks pretty good along the inner side of the fuselage there. Now I do have a little bit of a tip up at the top here at the end of the leading edge root extension. Like I said, we'll worry about peeling that off. So once again, I can use, if I'm careful here, I'll just peel the plans off of the foam again, and I'll reuse them one more time to do my bottom KF. Again, just very carefully peeling them off. Now, because this is Adam's Ready board, I've actually peeled peeled the paper off the foam on this one side as well. The glue just pulled it off. But if you're using Dollar Tree foam, we're going to peel the paper off both sides of it anyway. So that's not too big of a deal. So I'm just going to go ahead now and unpause again. I'll cut out my bottom KF, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit more about choices of foam, thicknesses of foam, depending on what thickness of foam you're actually building your plane out of. Okay, so be back with you very shortly. All right, folks, so I have my bottom, or my top, which would, if you were just using this, would be simply a KF2 airfoil, and now I have my bottom cut out as well. So what I like to do is just do a quick check, on the outer portion, make sure that these two are very, very close. Again, you can always trim them a little bit, you know, as you're dry fitting them and after you get them on the plane if need be. What I'd like to do now is that, let's say this is the first time that I've built the F-18 version 5. I have my 40% KF airfoils. Now I'll use these to trace out another set, pardon me, maybe even 2 sets, and then what I'll do is I'll use you know, a set just right on them that they're the KF top and bottom KF for an F-18 version 5, and then I'll use those, you know, put those away in my storage bin, and then I'll use them for templates if I want to build another F-18 down the line. Then I don't have to do all this measuring and messing around with the plans. I can just trace out you know, as many sets of KF airfoils as I feel that I need. Okay, so let's talk about materials. So I build a lot of my planes, my wing plate out of Adams Ready board, which you know, has it's about 5 millimeters thick with the paper on, about 4.5 with the paper removed. In my experimentation, you can use, you know, if you can't get that kind of foam, if you use foam, let's say you're building out a Depron or model plane foam, or you know, some other sort of, say, 6 millimeter type foam, which most park jets are designed for, is you can make your KFs out of that same foam up to the equal thickness of the foam of your wing plate. I find that this Adams Ready board, it works really, really well for me, mostly because it's, you know, it's very, very inexpensive, and it just seems to have the right thickness of step to give me the feeling that I like. So if you were building this out of 6 millimeter foam, you could go, I would say maybe go no less than 50% of the thickness of your wing plate, anywhere probably between 50%, more on the lines of like 2/3 to you know, full thickness. So, you know, if you're using 6 millimeters, if you can use 4.5 millimeters, that seems to work well for me. But again, you know, a lot of it boils down onto what you can get, what you can afford, and what works for you. Maybe you like thicker KFs. I wouldn't go, if you're building a plane, I don't know, out of insulation foam, 1/2-inch pink insulation foam or something like that, I probably wouldn't put 1/2-inch thick KFs on it, because it's going to cause you way too much drag. So I would, you know, again, I would downsize those accordingly. But that's sort of what I like to use. So if you're going to use Adams Ready board, and I'm just going to show you, this is, I guess, kind of a bonus, because I do build most of my wing plates now out of Adams Ready board, is what I will do is I will trace, because I remove the paper, where on the wing plate where the KF is going to go. So I'll just use the KF, the top and bottom, to trace it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to very gently score this paper here, and I'm going to remove the paper top and bottom, because I like to have bare foam to bare foam when I'm using Dollar Tree foam. So that's one thing that you want to do. You can also go ahead, I personally like to have my planes, when I measure my CG, I like to have my planes flipped upside down like this. And so what I like to do is I make sure at some point in time before it's too late and I forget, is I'll use that little hole, the little pinhole where we've already marked the CG on the wing plate, and I'll poke another pin through and make sure that it's also marked now on my KF airfoil. And then that way, you know, after I glue it on, then I'll be able to, when I'm, you know, getting to the latter stages and I need to check my CG, I'll have that done. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I need to do, get all the paper peeled off, and then I'll come back and show you how I like to glue mine on, and then we're getting close to the end. So I'll be back with you very soon. All right, folks. So we've got our I've got my KFs cut out. I've peeled the paper. I mean, again, I'm using Dollar Tree foam, so I've peeled the paper off both sides. I've also trimmed the paper, off my wing plate where the KF is going to be, because I don't need that paper there for weight or for strength. Again, this is just a quick Dollar Tree foam building tip that I found works well. Is before I put my KFs along this edge here where I've made cut the paper, is I'll take I use this. I actually get this luckily enough at my local Dollar Tree store. It's a premium craft glue made by Craft Medley, but it's exactly the same as Bob Smith Industries foam cure. So I'll put a very thin bead on there and then squeegee that real thin with some scrap foam, so that essentially I'm gluing the edge of the paper to the foam and sealing it there. I'm eventually going to put oil-based Minwax on the paper anyway, but if you don't glue the edge there, what can happen is the Minwax doesn't actually glue the paper to the foam. It can still peel if you get any moisture under there. So I've got the paper taken off, so just, again, do a quick dry fit before you start applying glue. One of the main things, especially for using KF4 airfoils, and I always use the same thickness of foam top and bottom. Again, there's people that have used thinner foam on the bottom and thicker foam on the top. I personally didn't really like that setup very much, so I use equal thickness top and bottom. So you just kind of want to, do a quick check, make sure everything's fitting. You don't have any, real big bunches of foam hanging over. So I use, currently I've been using this Elmer's spray adhesive. I think I got it at Walmart or a craft store, and it's different than this stuff. This is the Elmer's Craft Bond. This is what I use to put my my plans down on my foam, because it will hold the paper in place. And as long as I just use a fine mist, I can still peel my plans off. This stuff is far more permanent. Any glue, obviously, that you use, you can also use 3M Super 77 spray adhesive. I've used that a lot. It's worked really, really well for me. Obviously, any adhesive that you use, you want to test it on some bare foam of all your foams. Make sure that it's not going to melt your foam or cause your foam to break down. So normally I'll put the another thing that I've done is over here I've just ripped off a bunch of little chunks of masking tape, because once we get the airfoils on the wing plate top and bottom, I'm just going to tape them to to hold them in place, and then to let the glue dry overnight. So I've spread out some wax paper here, just because the wax paper doesn't allow things, the wax on the paper doesn't allow things to sort of stick to it. So I'll just put the top one on here real quick. So a nice even coating of glue. Pop it on there. This stuff in 3M Super 77, it actually does start to tack up pretty quickly, so yeah, just a nice fit. Give it a nice gentle press all around there, because you've got a lot of surface area there. And I will actually now, because I only have the foam on the top on the leading edge root extensions, I'll put a couple of chunks of tape along there to help hold that into place. There we go. Okay, so then we'll do the bottom one. So the bottom one, you need to put glue on that side. Again, just a nice even coat. So again, as you're lining this up, especially the bottom one, you want to make sure, I just sort of look down the trailing edge on the bottom and line it up as well as you can along the trailing edge, and I'll talk a little bit more. So now that I'm pretty happy with how that is, I'm just going to, I put some tape normally right on the end to hold that in place, and then I'll pop a couple more chunks. Obviously, your plane's going to be a lot bigger, so you'll need some more pieces. And then I'll again, just just nicely, with nice gentle pressure, just press it all the way along, especially along the leading edge, or trailing edge, I mean, because sometimes after you put this tape on, the trailing edge might lift up a little bit. So just press press that on there, and so there we go. So what I do, I'm going to get rid of this wax paper here so I don't glue anything to my cable. And then what I like to do now is I like to leave this actually overnight, because I'm going to use initially use a nice sharp knife to start trimming down the leading edge of my KF and along my lurks here. So what I like to have is that glue to be nice and dry, so that it's not, you know, because if it's still a bit wet or soft, it's going to really gum up the knife. Now, one of the reasons why it's very important to have these trailing edges as equal as possible, top and bottom, is what can happen is even a millimeter or two difference is, you know, as your plane is flying, it can cause imbalances in pressure between the top and the bottom of the wing, and it can, you know, you end up with a situation where your plane might zoom or it might dive. Recently, when I built my RC Powers T50 version 5, one of my wings, I actually had my bottom KF was like almost a millimeter or 2 millimeters further back than my top KF. And my first couple of flights were pretty hairy. You know, I take full responsibility for not paying close attention. What was happening is that as the plane was, you know, as it was accelerating, is the left wing would really dip quite aggressively, and then as I was slowing down to land, again, the wing, I was thinking I was having problems with tip stalls. So, you know, I tried to trim it out, but the trim didn't seem to help much. So what I found was that my bottom KF was actually about 1.5 millimeters, almost 2 millimeters in spots, longer than the other, the top one. So what you can do is, I'll just show you now before I forget, if I forget in the next part, is if you want to just do a quick check, is you can take, just take a pin. These are really fine pins so that you're not poking great gaping holes in your wing. And I just, what I'll do is I'll just go along the trailing edge, say of the top, and I'll just gently push it down through, and then sort of see, whoop, gotta go a little further out here to get the so those look pretty good. What I forgot to mention before I put this bottom KF on is that I normally will, because I like to have my servos up close to my CG, lots of times my servos will be interfering with this inner part of the bottom KF. So as you can see on this SU30 version 4, what I actually did was I cut, I still went through the same process as we're doing here, to get, you know, to make sure that all the angles and everything else so that the trailing edges will line up. And then what I did actually before I glued it on was I trimmed, I think I trimmed about, you know, real size here, I trimmed about 3/4 of an inch off of the inside where this would normally meet the nacelle, just so that when I mount my servos are actually being mounted directly onto the wing plate, not, you know, trying to, you know, push them in on top of the KF, and then you're not, the servos are not going to be secure. Don't worry about that. I've never had, you know, just removing that 3/4 of an inch on the inside of the bottom KF has never caused me any issues, but it certainly has made my life a lot easier when it comes to installing my servos. So that's something to think about depending on how you like to set up your servos on your park jet. Alright, so there we go. Like I said, I'm just going to let this now actually set up and dry overnight, and then I'll show you how I mark the trailing edge and then start to trim it and sand it and get it ready, and we'll have more discussion on what we're going to do there. So yeah, be back with you in a little while. Thanks. Alright, we're back, folks. Just getting right down to towards the end of it now. I'm just going to show you here how I sort of roughly shape the leading edge of my KFs, because you know, obviously you wouldn't want to fly your plane with such a blunt leading edge. It's really not going to fly very well, way too much drag, and could cause some issues. Now you can sand this down completely. You don't have to do you know, do the first part with a razor knife if you don't feel comfortable with that, or you don't have you know, a knife that might work. Essentially what I like to do, and there's arguments for different leading edge shapes. Years ago when I first got into park jets, a lot of people were doing like a chiseled edge where you just had sort of an angle along the top and nothing on the bottom. I've been using this, it's sort of a, as you can hopefully see there, it's a fairly sharp, I guess, leading edge. I just find it easiest to do, and my planes fly pretty good that way. Other people like to round the whole leading edge. You know, I've never tried that. For me, that's probably just a bit too much work, and I'd probably end up getting it wrong. But anyway, so what we're looking for here is that this total angle here is about 45 degrees. So fairly shallow here, around 22 and a half degrees on either side, for a total of about 45 degrees here. Essentially, just looking to sort of transition it, nice and smooth. So, if you don't feel comfortable doing it on your airplane right away, maybe just glue, three pieces of foam together to make a little sandwich, and then practice on some scrap foam. Now, traditionally for me, with the thickness of foams that I use, I draw a line about from the leading edge about 3/8 of an inch back from the leading edge, top and bottom, as you can see here. Now, what I've done on this Lurks is I've just sort of made a few little marks around about 1/4 of an inch, and then just sort of roughly hand draw hand drawn a line there to kind of join, just as a guide there. So the main thing that I've learned is take off a little bit less than you need, because you can always fix it up with some sandpaper afterwards, which is what I'm going to do. And then because if you cut a great big gouge, then it really is a pain in the rear end to then go back and fill it and then do that sort of stuff. If for your first couple of tries, if you want to, you can draw a line sort of down the center of the wing plate, kind of thing. I mean, that's a very rough line, obviously, but that's also sort of going to be your guide, because essentially what you want to do is you want to cut the angle, cut the foam at an angle, so that you're intersecting your line, or using this line here on the wing as a guide, or on the KF as a guide, and then sort of right down the center of the actual wing plate that is sandwiched between the two KFs. Again, this is for KF4. You might have to come up with some kind of different idea. You'll probably end up with more of that chisel style leading edge if you just go with KF2. But anyway, I'm going to show you what I like to do for KF4. So obviously, normally I'd have my fuselage of my whole plane here to make it a little bit easier. So hopefully I'm going to be able to do this in a way that you can see without cutting myself. So now, it is very important from a safety standpoint that you put your other hand in a place where, in case the knife pardon me, the knife slips, you're not cutting your hand. So I'm left-handed. It's going to be a bit tricky, but I like to use this type of knife because I like to sort of cut at an angle like this, so I've got lots and lots of blade area here. And I also like to put a brand new sharp blade in before I do this, because I don't want the foam to be ripping or pilling or any of that sort of stuff. These blades are pretty inexpensive. I get these. These are normally you sort of snap these off. I buy these a lot because I find for cutting my plans out of Dollar Tree foam, I use these because Dollar Tree foam will dull the knife blades pretty quickly. So I just pick these up at the dollar store, and this I think the handle is just an old Hobby King knife. You can get the more expensive ones like the Olfa's, really heavy-duty handle. Okay, so let's just get right into cutting here. I also like to cut, and this is going to be a bit awkward for me because I'm not sort of looking. I also like to cut sort of so that I'm pushing the KF sort of down into the wing. If you cut in a way where you're pulling this way, you can end up pulling the KF up off the wing, which you don't really want to do. Okay, so let me just sort of get myself lined up here. So yeah, so just very slowly get the knife going there, and then just very slowly, again using the line as a guide, and getting my hand out of the way. And again, just don't take off, only take off a little less than maybe what you might think you would need. And then normally when I get to the intersection there on the top here, I just sort of cut in there, get rid of that bit there. So now I've got sort of a rough, I guess, about a between 20 and 25. And if if you look at your leading edge of the actual wing, if there's still quite a bit there, you can go back and just sort of very gently trim a bit more off, or just do it with sandpaper. So for the lurks here, sometimes it's a little bit difficult to get started, but you can just kind of get yourself started, and then you're just essentially shaping this so that it's going to be a nice smooth transition as the air goes across the wing. And you can do a little bit of shaping and trimming, or do it with sandpaper as well. So I'll just go ahead now and do the bottom. And since you've already seen me do the top, I'll just kind of do this way. I know this is not the smartest thing to do, to cut towards myself, but okay, so we'll just shave this off. Nice and slow. There we go. Alright, so you can sort of see roughly kind of the angle that we're looking for there, and it's the leading edge of the wing is looking pretty good. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and just sand this. What I like to do is sand. Obviously now I've got pretty much a corner here. I want this to sort of be smooth. So what I normally do is I just use like a 150 grit sandpaper. If you haven't sanded foam before, be very, very careful. Just use a very gentle touch. Don't press too hard, because especially with a softer foam like a Dollar Tree foam, it can really tear the foam or leave great big gouges in the foam, which you don't want to do. So yeah, so I'm just going to pause now. I'm going to go just lightly sand this, quickly sand this, and then we'll come back with some finishing thoughts. Alright folks, so I've done just a quick sanding here to just kind of get things smooth and evened out. Again, same sort of thing, as similar to making sure that your trailing edges are even top and bottom if you're using KF4. Just make sure, do a little bit of sanding on the top, maybe a little bit of sanding on the bottom. Try and get that, this leading edge here nice, nice and even. Try not to have it sort of more shallow on the top, or one on the top or bottom. And the thing with foam, again, if you haven't sanded foam before, don't be sitting there while you're watching the hockey game or something, sanding away. Just a few light brushes. It doesn't take very much. A few light brushes with the sandpaper. Then have a look at it, and then just kind of sand it down to your to what looks good to your eye, and it really just helps keep that airflow nice and smooth. The other thing I would say is don't sand. I know some people have actually sanded the step on the back here. To get the full effect of the KF airfoil, you need to leave that step, because the air needs to go over that step and then create the little vortex. So if you actually sand this down, you'll find that you're not going to get, you'll get some airfoil type. Your plane will probably feel a lot smoother than it would if just it had a single plate wing, but you're going to lose a lot of the effect of the KF airfoil. So don't sand that. If you want to experiment and see what the difference is, just take some masking tape and sort of run some masking tape down here to sort of get rid of that step effect, and I think you'll notice a real difference. So anyway, so there's quick and dirty, folks, on how I do KF4s on my park jets. You know, from the starting to you know, if you're building a plane and it either you know, maybe you don't like the size of the KFs, or you know, you want to experiment with some different sizes. Hopefully that's given you a good step-by-step process on things to look for, or you know, that you can experiment with. And then, like I said, if you like it, if you like the way the airfoil is or that size, then you know, make yourself a template so that in case you build the plane again, you don't have to go through all that measurement and drawing and all that sort of stuff at the very beginning. Also, don't if the plane calls for the plans call for reinforcement underneath where the KFs are, don't rely on your KFs as the reinforcement for your wing. You know, the KF airfoils will help with the reinforcement, but don't use them as a replacement for the reinforcement, because you'll probably end up finding your wing is far too flexible. So anyway, so I hope that's been helpful. Again, please check out the comments down below for my blog post that I mentioned at the very start of the video on, you know, some more details on how KF airfoils work, and some, you know, again, some more of my ideas and my opinions, as well as the supporting blog posts for this video, where I'll have some more detailed pictures of these that I talked about for, you know, sort of more swept wing MiG SU type wings, and F-22 wings, things that I've used that have worked for me really well in the past. So thanks very much for watching. Blue skies, calm winds to everyone. Park jet noise, the other sound of freedom, baby. Take care.